To follow up my little chat with Raptor, which uh you can find on my YouTube now. He was saying some stuff like, well, no one comes out of a conflict like that with their hands clean. Everyone does bad things in war, whatever. So I went in and I just said how that's not true. I just said, "Hey, you're wrong, and here's why." Um, and he was cool about it. He was very cool. Intro. From the earliest days of the Russian Revolution to the present, propaganda campaigns have been conducted against the Soviet Union. Those in positions of power in capitalist countries see socialism as a threat to their continued profit and privilege, both to undermine the support of a socialist alternative at home and to maintain a dominant position in international economic and political relationships. All manner of lies and distortions are employed to cast the USSR in a negative light as possible, and as negative a light as possible. Stereotypes and caricatures have come to dominate many people's understanding of Soviet history and current reality. The particular issues of this psychological war are wide-ranging and are, at times, short-lived. The idea that socialist revolution, quote-unquote, nationalized children, my teacher's explanation of daycare years ago, has long since faded into history. American allegations in 1981 of Soviet chemical warfare in Southeast Asia, quote-unquote, yellow rain, eventually collapsed when the offending chemical was shown by scientists to be dung produced naturally by bees in flight. Literally, literally just bees flying. Yeah, communism is when bees. I mean, actually, because, under capitalism, we're killing all the bees, so, yes. But it is the charges that are remembered. The retractions, if ever made, are relegated to the newspaper's back pages and forgotten. The various campaigns combine to shape popular perceptions in the service of political ends. This book is the story of one campaign that has endured. Based on the thesis that the 1932 to 33 famine in Ukraine was a deliberately planned, quote-unquote, genocide of Ukrainians by the Soviet government, the famine genocide campaign has surfaced intermittently over the past 5 decades. The 1980s revival of the famine genocide campaign has sought to win an acceptance of this theory in historiography. However, while historians accept that famine occurred in Ukraine in 1932 to 33, as well as in other areas of the USSR, they are still debating the causes, extent, and results. My examination of the campaign and its charges of Ukrainian genocide, quote-unquote, does not attempt to study the famine in any detailed way. Nonetheless, a few words are in order. The 1917 Russian Revolution was followed by military intervention by 14 foreign powers, including the United States, Britain, and Canada, and an extended civil war. The destruction of the 7 Years' War, revolution, and intervention, combined with severe drought, resulted in a widespread hunger and starvation, the Russian famine of 1921 to 22. Having survived these ordeals, the Soviets charted a course that had no precedence in world history, the building of a socialist society. They sought to transform a backward land plagued by poverty and illiteracy into an industrialized country with a modern agricultural sector. This was seen by the Soviets as necessary not only for economic and social development, but also for the very survival of socialism in a hostile international environment. In the early 1930s, the Japanese takeover of Manchuria and Hitler's seizure of power in Germany were seen as particularly menacing. The mass collectivization of agriculture and an ambitious industrialization program were the central features of the first 5-year plan launched in 1929. Collectivization met with active opposition from sections of the peasantry, and in many areas, the struggle approached the scale of civil war. Drought, a complicating factor, widespread sabotage, amateurish Soviet planning, Stalin's excesses, and mistakes caused the famine of 1932 to 33. Stalinist excesses. Okay, I don't know if I agree with this off the bat. I'm already mad in the intro. Drought certainly was a complicating factor. I agree with that part. There was a bunch of sabotage. The planning was in its infancy. Excesses, I'm gonna need some evidence for. And mistakes. Again, very vague. Throughout the famine genocide campaign, however, the factors of drought and sabotage have been ignored, denied, downplayed, or distorted. Soviet excesses and mistakes, in contrast, are emphasized, giving an anti-Ukrainian motivation, described as consciously planned, and the results exaggerated in depictions of starvation deaths in multi-millions. Fraudulent photographs and suspect evidence are extensively used to embellish charges of quote-unquote genocide, and are, in fact, the dominant images of the campaign. The sheer volume of non-authentic material used to support the genocide claim should be, in itself, be grounds for the outright rejection of such a dubious thesis. Featured in the Nazi press in 1933, the famine genocide campaign moved to Britain in 1934, and to the United States the year after. In Germany, a country with a history of strong communist, socialist, and trade union movements, the Nazis created the first organized propaganda campaign, 1933 to 35, as part of their consolidation of power. In Britain and the United States, on the other hand, the campaign was advanced as part of a right-wing efforts to keep the Soviet Union isolated and out of the League of Nations. It also served to discourage growing worker class militancy in the Great Depression. Yes, so the League of Nations is sort of like the precursor to NATO. It's like baby NATO. So it makes sense that they were already trying to exclude any communists, right? The famine genocide campaign finds its most ardent promoters among Ukrainian nationalists. The term Ukrainian nationalist is used here and throughout the book to denote the right-wing and fascist minority, not so much a minority anymore, in the Ukrainian community, among whose goals is an quote-unquote independent Ukraine on an anti-socialist basis. The author in no way seeks to identify this extreme nationalism with the Ukrainian nation or persons of the Ukrainian origin in general. This disclaimer, I think it's unnecessary, frankly. The campaign was given fresh impetus in the post-war period with the arrival in North America of several thousands of Ukrainian nationalists. Among the bona fide immigrants in the years just after the war were thousands of former Nazi collaborators and sympathizers. Yes. Their direct interests in the campaign coincided with the Cold War propaganda of that time. The Cold War climate of the Reagan era has seen a revival of the campaign, surpassing that of the 1930s and the 1950s. While movies like Rambo and Red Dawn occupy the fantasy space of this political assault on the Western cultural intellect, the exhumation of the, quote, Ukrainian famine genocide, unquote, attempts to carry the assault into the pseudo-historical realm. The campaign further serves to distract attention from recent investigations of war crimes committed by nationalist collaborators now resident in the West. U.S. historian J. Arch Getty has commented, We might profitably wonder about the resurgence of the intentional famine story just now. It seems to be part of a campaign by Ukrainian nationalists to promote the idea of a terror famine in the West. The not-so-hidden message behind the campaign coincides with the long-standing political agendas of émigré groups. Given that the Soviets could murder so many of their own people, might they not be willing to launch a destructive war in order to spread their evil doctrine? Because the Soviets are like the Nazis. We must avoid appeasement, maintain our vigilance, and stop deporting accused World War II criminals to Eastern Europe. We can't send the Nazis. We can't send the Nazis to the Gulag. That would be unethical. A terror famine. Terror famine. As opposed to the other famines, which weren't meant to induce terror or something. I don't know. Just vibes. Overall, the specific motivations of the nationalist campaign are consistent with the foreign policy goals of the broader right wing. Cold War confrontation, rather than historical truth and understanding, has characterized the famine genocide campaign. By cutting through the tangled web of fraudulent evidence, Nazi and fascist connections, cover-ups and wartime collaboration, and questionable scholarly research, it is my hope that this book will contribute to exposing the political myth of Ukrainian genocide. The historical study of the famine of the 1932 to 33 serves an objective and non-propagandistic approach. The student isn't even trying to do propaganda for the USSR. He's just like, this is wrong. This is wrong objectively. And I just want to say that. Maybe it's gonna be okay. It is like that, like Chatter said, but, it seems like we're gonna learn stuff here. Some dudes are just motivated by wanting things most accurate. Yeah, I mean, and we love them for that. This is like my, I have a pet theory. Everyone who's ever been like a great historian or a great artist, or a great politician, or, like genuinely influential in any way, they are autistic. They are autistic, and I see it, and I see you, and I love you for it. They genuinely just want to understand the truth of a thing, and they will stop at nothing to get there. And I love that about us. I love that about us. I have similar suspicions, genuinely. And this isn't even on some, like, I don't know, like, whatever you want to call it, fucking eugenicist, Asperger's, like, type shit. I think we are all kind of like this. We just need to have, like, the outlet and, like, access to education to, like, find our thing. That's it. I say while working on a railway game to relax, yeah. I'm saying. Reminds me of the Istihar video where she describes historical analyses, where the author is required to say, listen, I'm so sorry for the evidence points this way. I promise I'm not a Stalinist. He was so bad. I'm so sorry the evidence doesn't point to what you said. I'm so sorry. I hate communism, I swear. Oh. Genuinely, that's why I just tell people to read Stalin. Like, genuinely read Stalin. Like, if you want to go through all of his collective works and highlight the passages for me that you don't like, because I would be very interested in hearing that. Chapter 1. Thomas Walker, the Man Who Never Was. In 1898, various U.S. business interests, including sugar companies, were anxious for the United States to seize Cuba. A pretext was needed to build up pro-war sentiment among the U.S. public. American press magnate William Randolph Hearst So the story goes, assigned the noted artist Frederick Remington to Cuba to find evidence of the conditions which would justify a U.S. military intervention. Finding nothing out of the ordinary, Remington cabled back to Hearst, "Everything is quiet here. I wish to return." Hearst replied, "Please remain. You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." Jeez. The girls are fighting. Oh my. They sent an artist to Cuba to see what they were doing wrong, and dude was just like, "I like it here. Can I stay? Can I stay?" I like that. It's just like the passages about feeding the children. Children are too loud and they hurt my ears. Oh my god. In the fall of 1934, an American using the name Thomas Walker entered the Soviet Union. After tarrying less than a week in Moscow, he spent the remainder of his 13-day journey in transit to the Manchurian border, at which point he left the USSR never to return. The seemingly uneventful journey was the pretext for one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated in the history of 20th century journalism. Some 4 months later, on February 18, 1935, a series of articles began in the Hearst Press by Thomas Walker, quote, noted journalist, traveler, and student of Russian affairs who has spent several years touring the Union of Soviet Russia, unquote. The articles appearing in the Chicago American and the New York Evening Journal, for example, described in hair-raising prose a mammoth famine in Ukraine. In the Ukraine, which it alleged had raised 6 million lives in the previous year. Had claimed 6 million lives. Please. In 1 year. Oh my god. Oh my. Accompanying the stories were photographs portraying the devastation of the famine, for which it was claimed Walker had smuggled in a camera under the most adverse and dangerous possible circumstances. Fuck. Oh, you're such a badass spy. Wow. You got a camera. Okay. In themselves, Walker's stories in the Hearst Press were not particularly outstanding examples of fraud concerning the Soviet Union, nor were they the greatest masterpieces of yellow journalism ever produced by the right-wing corporate press. Lies and distortions had been written about the Soviet Union since the days of the October Revolution in 1917. The anti-Soviet press campaigns heated up in the late 1920s and 30s, directed by those like Hearst, who wanted to keep the USSR out of the League of Nations and isolated in all respects. Thomas Walker's fake stories and photos appeared in the Hearst Press in February 1935. Other sources claim different photographers, years, and seasons for these laundered pre-1930s photos, which also show evidence of alteration and touch-up. This is an excerpt from Hearst Chicago American, February 25, 1935, is published as Famine Genocide Evidence in a 1983 issue of the Chicago-based Ukrainian nationalist journal, Ekron. So they do the same thing today, right? Like, they'll use the same photos from, like, a flood in, like, fucking, I don't know, like, India, like, from 20 years ago, and they'll be like, this is happening right now. And China's doing nothing. Like, that kind of thing, you know? However, the Walker famine photographs are truly remarkable in that, having been exposed as utter hoaxes over 50 years ago, they continue to be used by Ukrainian nationalists and university propaganda institutes as evidence of alleged genocide. The extent of Walker's fraud can only be measured by the magnitude and longevity of the lie they have been used to portray. Horror stories about Russia were common in the Western press, particularly among papers and journalists of conservative or fascist orientation. For example, the London Daily Telegram of November 28, 1930, printed an interview with Frank Eastman Woodhead, who had, quote, just returned from Russia after a long visit lasting 7 months, end quote. Woodhead reported witnessing bloody massacres that November, a slaughter which left rows of ghastly corpses. Louis Fisher, an American writer for The New Republic and The Nation, who was in Moscow at the time of the alleged atrocities, discovered that not only had such events never occurred, but that Woodhead had left the country almost 8 months before the scenes he claimed to have witnessed. Fisher challenged Woodhead and the London Daily Telegram on the matter. Both responded with embarrassed silence. Excellent. When Thomas Walker's articles appeared in the Hearst Press, Fisher became suspicious. He had never heard of Walker and could find no one who had. The results of his investigation were published in the March 13, 1935 issue of The Nation. Mr. Walker, we are informed, quote, entered Russia last spring. That is the spring of 1934. He saw famine. He photographed its victims. He got heartrending first-hand accounts of hunger's ravages. Now famine in Russia is hot news. Why did Mr. Hearst keep these sensationalist articles for 10 months before printing them? My suspicions grew deeper. Curious. I felt more and more sure that he was just another Woodhead, another absentee journalist. And so I consulted Soviet authorities who had official information from Moscow. Thomas Walker was in the Soviet Union once. He received a transit visa from the Soviet consul in London on September 29, 1934. He entered the USSR from Poland by train at Nagornoye on October 12, 1934. Not the spring of 1934, as he says. He was in Moscow on the 13th. He remained in Moscow from Saturday the 13th to Thursday the 18th, and then boarded a Trans-Siberian train, which brought him to the Soviet-Manchurian border on October 25, 1934, his last day on Soviet territory. His train did not pass within several hundred miles of the black soil of Ukrainian districts, which he, quote, toured and, quote, saw and walked over and photographed. It would have been physically impossible for Mr. Walker in the 5 days between October 13 and October 18 to cover 1/3 of the points he describes from personal experience. My hypothesis is that he stayed long enough in Moscow to gather from embittered foreigners the Ukrainian local color he needed to give his articles the fake verisimilitude they possess. Mr. Walker's photographs could easily date back to the Volga famine in 1921. Many of them might have been taken outside of the Soviet Union. They were taken at different seasons of the year. One picture includes trees or shrubs with large leaves. Such leaves could not have grown in the late spring of Mr. Walker's alleged visit. Other photographs show winter and early fall backgrounds. Here is the journal of the 27th. A starving, bloated boy of 15 calmly poses naked for Mr. Walker. Huh? Wait, huh? I'm sorry, what? Get him out of there. What? The next moment, in the same village, Mr. Walker photographs a man who is obviously suffering from the cold despite his sheepskin overcoat. The weather that spring must have been as unreliable as Mr. Walker. To show nude poses one moment and require furs the next. It would be easy to riddle Mr. Walker's story. They do not deserve the effort. The truth is that the Soviet harvest of 1933, including the Soviet Ukraine's harvest, in contrast to that of 1932, was excellent. The grain tax collections were moderate, and therefore conditions even remotely resembling Mr. Walker's portrays, those Mr. Walker portrays, could not have arisen in the spring of 1934, and did not arise. Fisher challenged the motives of the Hearst press in hiring a fraud like Walker to concoct such fabrications. Mr. Hearst, naturally, does not object if his papers spoil Soviet-American relations and encourage foreign relations with hostile military designs upon the USSR. But his real target is the American radical movement. These Walker articles are part of Hearst's anti-Red campaign. He knows that the great economic progress registered by the Soviet Union since 1929, when the capitalist world dropped into depression, provides left groups with a spiritual encouragement and faith. Mr. Hertz wants to deprive them of that encouragement and faith by painting a picture of ruin and death in the USSR. The attempt is too transparent, and the hands are too unclean to succeed. In a postscript, Fisher added that Lindsay Parrott had visited Ukraine and had written that nowhere in any city or town he visited did I meet any signs of the effects of the famine, of which foreign correspondents take delight in writing. Parrott, says Fisher, wrote of the excellent harvest in 1933. The progress, he declared, is indisputable, Fisher ends. The Hearst organizations and the Nazis are beginning to work more and more closely together. But I have not noticed that the Hearst press printed Mr. Parrott's stories about a prosperous Soviet Ukraine. Mr. Parrott is Mr. Hearst's correspondent in Moscow. The incredible photographs accompanying Walker's fake stories also aroused the suspicions of James Casey, an American investigative writer. Headlined by Hearst as having just taken in the Soviet Union, the photographs were in fact resurrected and rejuvenated. Art department heads of the Hearst newspapers have been instructed to dig up old war and post-war pictures from the files. Pictures taken 15 to 18 years ago from the war-torn areas of Europe. Some of the pictures have been retouched to look like new. In other cases, the old war pictures have been rephotographed. As a result, many of them look like prints. Literally using pictures from Europe to demonize USSR. Like, your own famines. Bruh. Classic. How Western Depression era Russia was so thoroughly excluded in U.S. school history is so suspicious. Yeah, they have to. They literally have to. Some of the photographs were eventually identified as showing scenes from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. One photograph from the New York Evening Journal, February 18, 1935, was identified by Casey as actually portraying an Austrian cavalry soldier standing beside a dead horse following a World War I military action. Similar faked pictures, Casey noted, are now appearing in the Volkischer Beobachter, Der Stürmer, and other Nazi papers, and are being circulated throughout Germany. Hearst and Walker were prepared to go to incredible lengths of cynicism and perverse cruelty in exploiting human sentiments of compassion. Famous among the Walker photographs is The Frog Child, published with the following caption: "Frightful. Below, Kharkov is a typical peasant's hut, dirt floor, thatched roof, and one piece of furniture, a bench, a very thin girl, and her 2.5-year-old brother." This younger child crawled about the floor like a frog, and its poor little body was so deformed from lack of nourishment that it did not resemble a human being. Its mother had died when it was only 1 year old. This child had never tasted milk or butter, and only tasted meat. Had only tasted meat? I'm sorry, what? Sorry, what the fuck? Oh, this sounds like Yeonmi Park, dude. It sounds like fucking Yeonmi Park. One might as well say that this photo portrays a relief worker anywhere in Europe, sitting in a clinic waiting room with a starving or deformed child. There is something unmistakably urban, non-Slavic, and early 1920s-ish about the woman's flapper hat. Furthermore, the woman, who looks perfectly healthy, is dressed for cold weather, while her brother, quote-unquote, her brother, is naked. The bench has a ribbed back, as on an old-fashioned office bench, hardly corresponding to the sole household furniture of a typical peasant. As used in the Hearst press, this photograph and other Walker fakes encountered frequently in the Famine genocide campaign has been retouched and altered. It betrays the appearance of being a doctored copy of a non-primary source, rather than a direct print from a negative. This author has encountered this unforgettable picture in an early 1920s publication of a Russian famine of the following period, of the period following World War I. Hunger diet cripples Rus babies. Rus babies. This is the woman and her brother, the young woman. It's literally just a malnourished child. Like, that's how children look when they're malnourished. It's not. You know what I mean? And it's also, again, retouched and not from this. It's not from there. Content warning, winter. Thomas Walker's Girl with Frog Child. God. From Hearst's New York Evening Journal. The ableism is so bad. Contradictory claims from the origin of this photo were put forward by Nazi propagandists in the 1930s. As seen from the 1920s, this photo is still widely used as evidence of, quote, famine genocide. Wait, I didn't finish this sentence. Okay. In any event, it will still be recalled that Walker was never in Ukraine in 1932 to 33. Portions of the 1935 Hearst Walker series, including some of the photos, had in fact appeared the year previous in the August 6, 1934 London Daily Express. Attributed to an anonymous young English tourist, the story includes a virtually identical account of Walker's frog child fabrication. However, this earlier version of the hoax locates the tale in Belgorod, which is in Russia proper. Subsequent versions of the hoax over the decades politically relocate the story to Kharkov, which is, of course, in Ukraine. Thus, at least some of Walker's faked accounts were prepared well in advance of his actual fall of 1934 Soviet visit. It would seem that the Hearst Walker conspirators decided to come up with an expanded and improved series, including some of the materials published anonymously in Britain. One concludes that Walker's brief Soviet trip was simply an afterthought, a cosmetic gesture for the already planned publication of the series in Hearst's American Papers in 1935. Not only were the photographs a fraud, the trip to Ukraine a fraud, and Hearst's Famine Genocide series a fraud, Thomas Walker himself was a fraud. Deported from England and arrested on his return to the United States just a few months after the Hearst series, it turned out that Thomas Walker was in fact escaped convict Robert Greene. Oh, you mean they enlisted a fucking convict to do their dirty work? They would never. Wow. The New York Times reported Robert Greene, a writer of syndicated articles about conditions in Ukraine, who was indicted last Friday by a federal grand jury on the charge of passport fraud, pleaded guilty yesterday before federal judge Francis G. Caffey. The judge learned that Greene was a fugitive from Colorado State Prison, where he escaped after having served 2 years of an 8-year term for forgery. A career fraud, I see. Robert Greene, it was revealed, had run up an impressive criminal record spanning 3 decades. His trail of crime led through 5 U.S. states and 4 European countries, and included convictions on charges of violating the Man-White Slave Act in Texas, forgery, and marriage swindle. Dude, he was the OG TikTok swindler. Also, wait, what's the Man-White Slave Act? Did he own slaves? I'm sorry, did he own slaves? Oh, yeah, it's like human trafficking. For, like, prostitution. Okay. Wow. What a piece of shit. Okay. Um, Evidence at Walker's trial revealed that he had made a previous visit to the Soviet Union in 1930 under the name Thomas J. Burke. Of course he did. Fucking course he did. Having worked previously for an engineering firm in the USSR, what? He was, by his own admission, expelled for attempting to smuggle a white guard out of the country. What is a white guard? I'm sorry. We're learning together, chat. Historical anti-communist military or paramilitary. Counter-revolutionary. White guard. Okay. A reporter covering the trial noted that Walker admitted that the Famine pictures it published with his series in the Hearst newspapers were fakes, and they were not taken in Ukraine as advertised. The evidence of famine genocide, brought to the American public by this noted journalist and witness, lives on in jaundiced historiographic circles. Sorry, Jen. Walker's material and claims of 6 million victims are still recognized and issued by history factories like Harvard University's Ukrainian Studies Fund, as well as by the Ukrainian nationalists' own media. Walker's fake photographs are the most prominently displayed pictorial evidence associated with post-war famine genocide campaigns, despite the fact that this material was exposed as fraudulent immediately following its release in 1935. Apparently, it is felt that the risks inherent in duping the public are necessary to further famine genocide concoctions. Chapter 2. The Hearst Press, the campaign continues. Despite the Thomas Walker fiasco, and if you weren't here for this, Thomas Walker was like literally a fake person. Like that's a pseudonym for a convict that they enlisted to spread propaganda in the Hearst Press, which I can only assume is affiliated with the CIA. It's giving CIA press. I don't know. I think Hearst is sort of like this era's Murdoch. I think he just kind of owned all the Western press, right? If I'm not mistaken. Anyway, okay. Despite the Thomas Walker fiasco, Hearst did not give up the famine genocide campaign. It was part and parcel of his overall propagation of anti-Soviet, pro-fascist views. While it is beyond the scope of this book to examine in detail the activities of the multimillionaire press magnate William Randolph Hearst, it can be stated that he was known to millions during the 1930s as America's #1 fascist. It is widely known that certain U.S. corporations, for example, Henry Ford, lent money to the Nazis, while a U.S. oil corporation fueled Franco's army during the Spanish Civil War. What is less widely known, however, is that for a period during the 1930s, Hearst employed Italy's fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, paying him almost 10 times the amount of the latter received in monthly salary while head of the Italian state. For a long time, Mussolini's chief source of income was $1,500 per week from the Hearst press. Early in 1935, however, he gave up writing regular articles because international politics were so delicate that he could not express himself frankly. Hearst was by no means the only extreme right-wing news mogul. John Seldes, a veteran correspondent of the Chicago Tribune and author of the classic Facts and Fascism, warned of the connections between big business, the press, and fascist tendencies in the 1930s and wartime United States. If the reader thinks of our chain of newspapers owners, Hearst, Howard, Patterson, and McCormick, as merely 4 of America's 15,000 publishers, he fails to see the danger to America from an anti-democratic, anti-American press. These 4 publishers put out 1/4 of all the newspapers sold daily on our streets. They own 40 out of the 200 big city newspapers, which make American public opinion. They run not only the 3 biggest newspaper chains in the country, but 2 of the 3 biggest news services which supply news to a majority of America's dailies. And because they have always been anti-labor, anti-liberal, and anti-democratic, even when not openly following Mussolini and Hitler lines, they constitute what I believe is the greatest force hostile to the general welfare of the common people of America. And this was before we further monopolized and consolidated our media moguls, right? Like before it was like 4 guys. It's literally like 2 guys now, right? Many of the most extreme famine genocide claims from the 1930s emanated from these publishers. This was not the limit of Hearst's fascist connections. In the late summer of 1934, Hearst visited Nazi Germany. This is a sideways picture, I assume, of Hearst. How do I flip this? How do I flip this? I want to read the caption. William Randolph Hearst, known to millions of Americans during the 1930s as America's #1 fascist, poses with Nazi leaders during the fall of 1934. Visit to Nazi Germany, left to right, Mr. Rocker, Hearst's private secretary, foreign political... What? Wait, no, I missed one. Nazi leader Alfred Rosenberg, William Randolph Hearst, Dr. Karl Boehmer, press division chief of the Nazi Hearst... Wait, Nazi... Fuck. The Nazi Foreign Political Bureau, Thilo von Trotha, Rosenberg's lieutenant. Some months later, after his return to the U.S., Hearst launched the Famine propaganda campaign. Christ. Oh, God. I just fucked up my neck so bad. In Munich, he was joined by a man he knew well. Ernst Honfstengel, press officer for the Reich and an intimate advisor of Hitler. While at Bad Nunheim, 4 stormtroopers arrived to inform Hearst that a plane waited to take him to Hitler, whom he met for a discussion. A number of agreements were reportedly reached, one being that Germany would purchase its foreign news through Hearst's news-gathering agency, the International News Service. The deal was said to have been worth 1 million marks a year. Wow. Deutsche Mark, I think. I assume that's in German currency. Perhaps such financial considerations served to underline Hearst's own political convictions, revealed in his comment reported in the New York Times. If Hitler succeeds in pointing the way of peace and order, he will have accomplished a measure of good not only for his own people, but for all of humanity. So he's just a Nazi. So Hearst is just like a full-on Nazi. Again, just like our Murdoch today, you know? Very much the same legacy. Hearst appears to have been long a devout promoter of German state interests. As far back as the First World War, he opposed loans and shipments of munitions to England and France, the arming of the United States merchantmen. He hired a former New York Times correspondent, William Bayard Hale, and sent him to Germany. Hale was later found to be in the pay of the Germans. Yeah, a long-standing collaboration between the U.S. and Nazi Germany before, during, and after World War II. Like, we never stopped, really. Hearst's wartime's news methods were so yellow that Harper's Weekly, suspecting Hearst was using mythical correspondence to send out fake dispatches, stated as much on October 15, 1915. In October 1916, the British and French governments banned the Hearst press from the use of cables and mails. The Canadian government followed suit by the following month, banning Hearst newspapers outright. To be caught with a Hearst newspaper in those days carried a $5,000 fine, or up to 5 years of imprisonment. Jesus Christ. Imagine actually banning the Nazi papers. Imagine if we banned all of our Nazi papers, you know what I mean? If, like, Fox News was just banned in, like, England or Germany, like, just imagine. It was following Hearst's trip to Nazi Germany that the Hearst press began to promote the theme of famine genocide in Ukraine. Prior to this, his papers had at times reflected a different perspective. For example, the October 1, 1934 Herald and Examiner carried an article by the former French Premier Edouard Herriot, who had recently returned from the traveling around Ukraine. Herriot noted, "The whole campaign on the subject of famine in the Ukraine is currently being waged. While wandering around Ukraine, I saw nothing of the sort." Not unrelated to plans for a famine genocide campaign was a massive Red Scare campaign which had been unleashed in the Hearst press in the late fall of 1934. To back up his call for legislation requiring teachers to swear loyalty oaths, Hearst assigned hundreds of reporters to expose radical professors in a red hunt that smeared many honest liberals. Honest liberals. A bit of a oxymoron. And while taking us offline on Nazi activities in Germany, Hearst launched a press attack against portraying alleged famine, misery, and brutality in the Soviet Union. For the Nazi press in Germany, its Volksdeutsche protégés in other countries, and the Hearst publishing empire in the United States, 1935 was to become the year of the Ukrainian famine. One of Hearst's famine genocide campaign allies, Dr. Ewald Amende, described the launching of the Hearst campaign. Quote, "On January 5th, 1935, William Randolph Hearst broadcast a speech based almost entirely on the account of Cardinal Innitzer Committee. The entire Hearst press next proceeded to deal with the Russian famine," end quote. Violently denigrating Soviet efforts to collectivize and industrialize, and at the same time shielding developments in Nazi Germany, Hearst gave vent to his elitist views on his coast-to-coast network broadcast. The truth is that the government by the proletariat, government the least capable and the least conscious element of the community, government by the mob, government by tyranny and terrorism, is the fearful failure that it needs to be and definitely deserves to be. Okay. Okay, dude. I just assumed that he was doing a transatlantic, so I did my best transatlantic. Did you say thank you? Did you say thank you? Okay. Having said so, Hearst did his utmost to make it so, at least in the imagination of his readers. The man who published uncensored articles by the Nazis Göring and Rosenberg and the fascist dictator Mussolini had launched his famine genocide campaign. By mid-February 1935, Hearst and his mercenary scribblers were ready to go into action. Reports of a prosperous Soviet Ukraine were killed, and in their place, faked stories of Thomas Walker were introduced. Following the Walker series, Hearst launched into his next caper, determined to convince Americans and the Soviet Union, convince Americans that the Soviet Union was a land of utter starvation, genocide, and cannibalism. Cannibalism? What? What? Wait, I didn't know they accused them of cannibalism. This is actually new to me. Okay. This time, he offered the tales of one Harry Lang, editor of the Daily Forward, a Yiddish-language publication of the extreme right-wing faction of the Socialist Party. Hearst's choice of Harry Lang made shrewd sense. Lang's socialist past would hopefully provide a more universal facade to his anti-Soviet campaign, the illusion of left-wing support. Why would a socialist team up with a multimillionaire capitalist publisher? Why would a socialist? Any predictions, chat? Hey, any ideas why a socialist would team up with a multimillionaire capitalist publisher? Any ideas? Mm-hmm. Anything to be inflammatory and paint someone saying the truth is unempathetic, yeah. Maybe to, I don't know, get published. Right. I mean, it's kind of like it's like a false dream, right? Like, sure, Hassan can get shown on Fox News. Is that a win? Is that a win in the publication of his Soc Dem campaign? Or is it hindering it? Is it detrimental? You know what I mean? Oh. Because we're talking about a fascist publisher, right? Like, that is the equivalence. Actually, it might be a win for him. For Hassan? Do you think? I don't know. I don't think that's the way. Normal, happy, drunk self again. Well, cheers. Cheers, comrade. Him personally, not for communism. Sure. Sure. Okay. By the early 1920s, following splits between right and left, the Forward had sunk to the status of a right-wing pulp journal. It came to represent the views and interests of a clique tied up with business union operators who resisted violently with ink, threat, and boot any militancy among the workers they dominated. In a 1926 strike, the Forward resorted to outright strike breaking against militant unionists whose demands, if won, would have embarrassed and jeopardized the hold its associates had on their unions. The Forward wholeheartedly fulfilled its holy mission. Daily, it delivered a barrage of red baiting against the strike. The aim of the communist leadership of the strike, the Forward cried, was to show Stalin that his American followers had begun to make a revolution. Since the beginning, the fur workers were not interested in this revolution. They were being terrorized by the communists to continue striking. The Forward even discovered, quote unquote, a mysterious room C in the strike headquarters. There, it narrated hundreds of fur workers who refused to support the strike were taken and beaten into submission by the, quote, communist terrorists. Communist terrorists. That's not... it's just so absurd. It's like, it's comically absurd, right? Because very few workers need to be convinced at all that, like, they deserve better conditions. They deserve better wages. Like, benefits. Like, you don't have to, like, bend someone's arm to get them into, like, a union contract. Like, you don't. The Forward carried advertisements which urged all furriers who wished to become financially independent to apply at certain strike-breaking employment bureaus. The workers angrily ripped into shreds of copies of the paper. Don't be a fucking scab, dude. Scabs... No. Just don't do it. You win nothing. In 1933, the Forward was even approached by employers to help set up company unions, so as to thwart organizing drives by militant unions, which would cost them more money in wages and benefits. Do not come. This was the same year that the Forward editor Harry Lang went to the USSR, the basis of his horror accounts of famine genocide. Thus, it was a very short political walk from Harry Lang's editorial office at the Forward to Hearst's lie factory, especially with regard to the inventions about Russia. Lang and the red-baiting Forward were as eager to defend capitalism as their associated union leaders were determined to maintain their positions as a labor aristocracy. It is therefore difficult to accept the terms by some historians to pass off Harry Lang's famine genocide stories as the admissions of a disillusioned socialist. Lang's contribution to Hearst's famine genocide campaign reached new heights of the macabre. Under such sensationalist headlines as Soviet masses pray at graves to die, Soviet secret police rob starving, guns force Russian labor, starving Soviets foes exiled to Arctic, and Soviet torture of women told, Lang bared Soviet horrors, quote unquote. In the office of a Soviet functionary, I saw a poster on the wall which struck my attention. It showed the picture of a mother in distress with a swollen child at her feet. And over the picture was the inscription, "Eating of the dead children is barbarism." What the fuck? So not just cannibalism, but baby cannibalism. Which, of course, I think is like a Epstein exclusive. That's kind of like the Epstein regime's thing. However, Hearst was no more successful with Lang than he had been with Walker. Lang's stories were publicly challenged by Americans who had visited or worked at some of the places he described in Ukraine. American worker Santo Mirabel wrote, Harry Lang, you say you were in Kharkov and saw workers returning from the tractor plant dirty, shabby, with babies in their arms because there are no baby carriages. Harry Lang, you are a liar. Didn't you see the baby carriages in the workers' apartments about 10 blocks away from the great tractor plant? Don't you know that the workers have plenty of facilities to wash and clean before leaving the plant? Didn't you see the kindergarten amongst the apartments? Didn't you see the same thousands of workers coming back in the nighttime to the plant auditorium to hear music and enjoy themselves for a couple of hours? These are the things I saw in Kharkov in 1932. I'm willing to meet Harry Lang on a platform at any time, liar and pen prostitute that he is, and let the public judge who he is telling the truth. Pen prostitute. I'm sorry, but that's very funny. I'm sorry, but that's objectively very funny. Lang was denounced by the Jewish working class movement and in his own Socialist Party. The Socialist Party's National Secretary, Clarence Sr., declared, "The Socialist Party of the United States repudiates the attacks upon Soviet Russia now appearing in the Hearst papers." Lang, who claims to be a socialist, has not only violently misrepresented the socialist attitude to Soviet Russia, but has placed himself beneath the contempt of all workers by making himself the tool of William Randolph Hearst, the bitter enemy of the labor movement and the principal mouthpiece for American fascism. Numerous meetings were held within Socialist Party circles on the issue of expelling Lang from the party. At one, representing 43 branches of the Workmen's Circle Group, I. Laterman stated that he had been in Ukraine at the same time as Harry Lang, and gave the Lie to Lang series in the Hearst Press. In mid-May 1935, the Illinois State Socialist Party called for Lang's expulsion, while the New York Socialist Party suspended his membership for a year. Even the forward itself printed a disclaimer. Lang wrote on his own responsibility. The forward had to admit the majority of the numerous protests which it had received concerning Lang's articles came from warm friends of the forward, who declare how much they deplore and are aroused by this incident. The Nation drew attention to a major motive of Hearst's choice of witnesses. Quote-unquote witnesses. The spectacle of a professed socialist, no matter how renegade, combining forces with the most unscrupulous and reactionary journalists in America in a campaign of misrepresentation regarding this first socialist country, is bound to be misleading. Hearst knows that his readers are not in a position to judge the accuracy of his charges. And he knows, too, that his ends can be best served by throwing a smokescreen over the amazing progress which the Soviet Union has made in the past 2 years. By attempting to discredit communism in distant Russia, he is merely resorting to an easy and dishonest method of attacking radicalism of all varieties in America. Despite the rejection of Harry Lang, Hearst had not yet exhausted his Famine genocide series. But time was limited. In 1935 was not a difficult year like 1932 or the pre-harvest portion of 1933, and Hearst's own correspondent was sending favorable reports of Soviet economic and social progress. However, Hearst was determined to starve the Soviet Union to death, even if retroactively. Following Lang on the list of hired pens was R.H. Sanger, who made his debut in late April issues of 1935. Initially introduced by the Hearst papers as ex-communist, Sanger later admitted that his communism consisted of having attended some classes at a socialist night school while employed at the Bureau of Foreign and Domestic Commerce in Washington. Took a couple of classes. To illustrate his stories, a photograph supposedly showing Sanger interviewing a group of Russian workers in Moscow was included. Critical observers, however, pointed out that the photo was credited to a staff photographer of Hearst's evening journal. None of the photographs showed conditions supporting claims of famine genocide. More witnesses were trotted out. In May 1935, Hearst celebrated the coming out of Andrew Smith, who had just returned home from 3 years in Soviet Union. Smith wasted little time in selling horror stories to the Hearst press, although his previous correspondence with American friends had not indicated any such state of affairs. Perhaps he needed a fresh start in unemployment-ridden America. Some shade. Casual shade. Okay. No doubt remembering how they burned their fingers in the previous series, the Hearst papers now reproduced alleged supportive documentation of Smith's stay. His entitled vacation papers. Those who knew Russian, though, pointed out that Smith's discharge certificate read discharged for loafing, not discharged for vacation. Loafing! It's funny. The Nation further discredited Smith's claims, exposing serious inconsistencies and falsifications in Smith's budget, described in the Hearst Press. Smith's stories were also denounced as lies by an American worker with whom Smith had worked in the Soviet Union, and whom he had named as a key witness to his allegations. Karl Blaha not only called Smith a liar, but gave a detailed and much different account of actual working and living conditions which he and Smith had experienced. The quote-unquote testimony of Andrew Smith was not limited to allegations of famine genocide. As late as 1949, he collaborated as a prosecution witness for the Cold War House Committee on American activities. On American activities. Sound familiar? Damn. We really are just doing McCarthy Part 2. We really are. Oh, here we go. Another informer of the McCarthy-era House Committee was certain Fred Beale, who had fled to the Soviet Union in 1930 to avoid a 20-year jail sentence resulting from the Gastonia strike. Beale returned incognito to the U.S. for 6 months and then returned to the Soviet Union voluntarily. Upon his final return to the United States in 1933, Beale, the unemployable fugitive in the midst of economic depression, was by 1935 preparing to sell out for money in hope of a reduced jail sentence. Classic. In June 1935, articles by Beale appeared in Harry Lang's Forward. Others followed in the Hearst Press. According to one newspaper, which published excerpts of Beale's earlier correspondence, which contradicted his claims in the Hearst Press, Beale's articles were coached during May 1934. Beale's accounts in the Hearst Press were disputed by fellow American workers, among them an auto worker, J. Wolinek, who had worked at the Kharkiv tractor plant from 1931 to 1935. Wolinek, who was not a Communist Party member, had known Beale in Ukraine for 2 years. He challenged Beale's reports of overheard conversations, revealing that Beale could not speak Russian or Ukrainian. Wolinek cited an earlier booklet by Beale entitled Foreign Workers in a Soviet Tractor Plant, in which Beale had given descriptions completely contradicting those he later wrote in the Hearst Press. Just a short time before he himself returned to the United States, Beale wrote in a booklet, "It would not be true to say that all foreigners have been satisfied with life in the Soviet Union. Most of them came with honest intentions, but there were also a few who expected something for nothing. They were, of course, disappointed and quickly returned. But most of those who go back tell the truth of the situation here." Beale was not one of the latter. Following his rehabilitation in the Hearst Press, Beale was allowed to serve only a token of his original jail sentence. His autobiography, Proletarian Journey, appeared in 1937, a classic in yellow journalism, used as a weapon in the famine genocide campaign to this day. In this book, Beale presents the slanderous examples of Americans who had volunteered to assist in Soviet industrialization. Beale's supposed dialogue with a black woman, who he alleges was picked off the streets to fill a Comintern quota of Black Americans to work in the USSR clearly shows his racist and sexist mentality. In response to his question about her past union membership, Beale's caricature replies, "No, sir, I don't belong to no union." Oh, God. I don't feel like I should read this. I feel racist reading this. I don't. I'm just gonna let you. I'm just gonna let you read it. I have eyes, yeah. To this invention, Beale adds a male American worker as Lecher, and rapist. Oh God. Oh God. What? This got dark really fast. Uh, okay. Elsewhere, he has one of his characters claim, "These Moscow broads are a dirty bunch. They never take a bath." Christ. Okay. Of course, the book would not be complete without a description of a land ravaged by famine genocide. I took the train from our little station of Lassavo, and rode for 2 hours to Chekuyev. From this place, we walked for several miles. We met not a living soul. We came upon a dead horse and a dead man upon the side of the road. The horse still laid harnessed to the wagon. The man was still holding the reins in his lifeless, stiff hands. Both had died from starvation. I don't I don't believe you. Frankly, I just don't believe you. It sounds so fucking made up, right? Hi, bub. Yeah, what a time to pop in. What a time. We're having a time. One may well ask why a train would bother stopping at a place where nobody was left alive for miles around, or how a man and his horse had expired simultaneously. Significantly, although Proletarian Journey is well illustrated with Bill's photos from the USSR, none even remotely indicate conditions of famine genocide and the hardship described in his book or earlier articles in the Hearst Press. Defending his articles in the Hearst Press, Beale writes in his autobiography, "The Hearst papers are read largely by the working masses and have always had a distinct bias in favor of labor." Rare indeed was the person who, even for a prize, would suggest that the Hearst Press was a friend of labor. Yeah, literally anti-labor, like the entire time. So that's weird. Nonetheless, Beale earns himself a special place in right-wing history books by claiming to have had an audience with Petrovsky, president of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, who allegedly told him that millions were dying. Contemporary anti-communist Sovietologists, such as Robert Conquest and Dina Dalrymple, cite Beale on this question, but as we have seen, Beale cannot be considered as a reliable source. 50 years later, witnesses, quote unquote, such as Beale, Walker, Lang, Smith, and others, continue to play their original role on the campaign stage. In fact, the 1930s campaign is having a bigger impact a half century later. References to the 1930s newspaper accounts led a certain superficial credibility to current famine genocide allegations. What was recognized in the 30s as politically motivated sensationalism has been transformed in the 1980s into primary evidence. Examples of fraud and contradictions exposed at the time, are conveniently forgotten. The notorious right-wing character of the Hearst Press is rarely remembered. By noting these features of the 1930s campaign and the selective memory of those who used the Hearst Press In propagating the genocide thesis, one gains a further insight into the character of today's famine genocide campaign. I'm learning a lot personally. I've heard about the Hearst Press here and there, but it's interesting to learn, exactly what they were doing. That's my main takeaway here. Chapter 3.
No.
Famine photographs. No more fun. No more fun. I just got banned. If you weren't here, the beginning 2 paragraphs basically went over one guy that went under like 6 different names. One single guy that used a bunch of aliases. It turns out he was incarcerated, and it was sort of his way to rat and get out of his sentence. So CIA doing CIA things, also collaborating with the Hearst Press, which was like the main fascist journal at the time. Okay, you're caught up. I think that's enough. Famine photographs. Which famine? Simultaneous with Hearst's 1935 famine genocide campaign, the Nazi press in Germany and similar papers elsewhere in Europe issued materials on the same theme. The Nazis had been flogging the issue as early as 1933, complete with fraudulently misstated photos. The official Nazi party organ, Völkischer Beobachter, publicized and lauded Hearst's campaign in its article, William Hearst über die Fuck me, German is impossible. I learned German and what the fuck is this word? Die Schaujetrische Hungarkatastrophe. William Hearst on the Soviet-Russian hunger catastrophe. Christ. Fuck German, for real. The Nazi contributions to the campaign did not go unnoticed. A New York Times correspondent remarked, "There has been a fresh outburst of quote-unquote starvation propaganda in the German and Austrian press, with appeals for charity for the quote-unquote unhappy victims of the Soviet famine, unquote." This writer heard in Berlin that this campaign was supported by photographs taken earlier. Some were even said to date to the Volga famine of 1921. This is a favorite trick of anti-Bolshevik propagandists. I'm not familiar with this one. Where is Volga? Volga famine. That's just the Russian famine? The Volga of the Ural river regions. Okay. Ural? Oh my god. Wikipedia says they all resorted to cannibalism. Where does that, that sounds familiar and untrue. Okay. Fucking Wikipedia. Okay. The propagandistic extension of the by then non-existent famine was further embellished by the appearance in 1935 of a German language book, Muss Russland hungern, by Ewald Amende. Its 1936 English language edition, Human Life in Russia, has had a long-lasting influence on those who propagate the famine genocide myth. The significance of Amende's book can be amende, I think. I don't know, dude. What, German? Again, I don't know. Can be appreciated by the fact that it was republished in 1984, after a 50-year lapse concurrent with the Reagan-era Cold War. Can I get a fuck Reagan? Can I get a fuck Reagan, please? Human Life in Russia makes little pretense of objectivity. Amende not only credits the accounts by Hearst Press characters like Andrew Smith and Harry Lang, but brings in press accounts from Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, and the émigré nationalist press. Allegations by unnamed travelers or experts are freely cited. Documentation is minimal. Footnotes are remarkably scarce and no bibliography is included. It's always anonymous source. They don't even say experts anymore. They just say an anonymous source in Russia or whatever, you know. An investigation of the photographic evidence is in order, particularly since virtually all photographic evidence commonly utilized to support famine genocide allegations can be traced to Amende, as well as Hearst's Thomas Walker series and German Nazi publications, which share a considerable number of identical photographs. Amende himself states the photographs are among the most important sources of actual facts of the Russian position. According to Harvard University's Dr. James E. Mace, who writes the apologetic historic introduction to the 1984 reprint of Human Life in Russia, Amende was personally involved in relief work during the 1921 to 22 Russian famine. This should be borne in mind, particularly when considering alongside the peculiarities, contradictions, and motivations in the use of the photographs. Further, Amende is most reluctant to acknowledge the photographic affinities of the human life in Russia with the earlier publication in England, the United States, Nazi Germany, and elsewhere. Everyone's just using the same photos from, again, often just like German, in fact, like German famines. Amende avoids any genuine documentation of the photographs in question. The majority of them were taken by an Austrian specialist. As with so many famine quote-unquote evidence books, Amende does not identify him. None of the photos are specifically identified as having been taken by the unnamed Austrian. We are informed that the authenticity of the photographs, which form a permanent record of the terrible events of Ukraine, is undoubted. We just trust it. Again, trust me, bro. However, the proof of this assertion consists in alleging that the photos had been examined and passed by nameless quote-unquote experts. Amende claims that the pictures were actually taken in the streets and squares of Kharkov in the summer of 1933, and it is also apparent from the various details clearly visible in the pictures. However, only 10 of the 26 photographs appear to portray urban scenes. Of these, only 2, opposite page 32, are identified as Kharkov by captions. They don't even caption it as being in Kharkov. Okay, that's great. These show what appear to be orderly assemblies outside stores. There is no apparent evidence of famine or panic, despite the caption's claim that the store is being besieged by the population. The queue in the second photo is actually rather sparse and lined in a well-spaced file. Although the store's signs are partially legible, the photos are undocumented as to date and specific location. Given the inefficiencies of Soviet food store distribution methods, such a picture might have been taken during any one of a number of years. This guy, again, this author is not a Marxist, so I take this with a grain of salt, the inefficiencies of Soviet food store distribution methods. It's actually incredibly efficient to essentially plan your economy, which even capitalist countries such as America recognize. Walmart centrally plans their distribution. That's why they always have everything in stock. Forever. Like that. Do you think that just happens because they just hired enough logistics managers? No, it's literally centrally planned with literally also the government. Like it. The sole remaining reference to Kharkov in any of the photos. It's found in a caption beneath a picture of some of the corpses lying in a boxcar opposite page 192. However, even this was not taken in Kharkov. The caption states, "These families boarded a train and went to Kharkov to demand food, which they did not, however, receive. When the train was opened, they were found to have died from hunger on the return journey." In truth, the photo portrays not families, but 3 or 4 corpses. Since the boxcar was opened on the return journey, it would have been as simple to identify the location as it would have been to name the photographer. But, as elsewhere, these most elementary details are not provided to support Amende's claims. The remaining street photos are, like the rest, undocumented and uncredited. Contrary to Amende's claims, they contain no clues as to what city or on what date they were actually taken. Signs, landmarks, etc., which are traditionally included to serve as points of identification, are noticeably absent. In some cases, the photos are composed or cropped in such a way that the identification of key human subjects is rendered impossible. Nor is it certain that these photographs were exposed by the same photographer and equipment. Human Life in Russia carries many photos not found in the book's original German edition. Although they are not specifically identified, one notes Amende's claims that these additional photos, quote, were supplied to the author by Dr. Ditloff. Ditloff? Silly name. For many years, director of the German government agricultural concession, Drusag, in the North Caucasus. After informing the reader that the German concession was liquidated in 1933 in late August, long after the Nazis took power, Amende states that the photographs were taken by Dr. Ditloff himself in the summer of 1933, and they demonstrate the conditions prevailing on the plains of the agricultural areas of the hunger zone. The hunger zone? I'm sorry, the hunger zone? The movie? Wait, the Hunger Games. It's so close, though. One notes that Dr. Ditloff was posted to the North Caucasus, not Ukraine. However, Amende is deliberately obscure as to just where Ditloff did his remarkable shutterbugging. Shutterbugging. If the plains of the agricultural areas of the Hunger Zone refer to Ukraine, as in subsequent claims of famine genocide, then one must consider what Ditloff, by then a functionary of the Nazi government, was doing wandering about the country unhindered and randomly snapping pictures. It's a good question. It's a good question. I too am asking. Many are asking. Little baby Russia. Yes. Ukraine, also known as Little baby Russia. Certain of Ditloff's photos are identical to those of Thomas Walker, already proven fraudulent. In one photograph, a girl holds a deformed frog child, the same photograph used by Walker. While Amende reproduces the evidence, quote unquote evidence, the bulk of Walker's fictitious frog child story, he does so not in connection with this photo, which he uses in another context. To avoid identification of the story with its equally fraudulent use in the Hearst Press in 1935, Amende cites its appearance in an unidentified London newspaper of August 6, 1934. This, in fact, turns out to be the London Daily Press. London? Doing false propaganda? It's not like that upsetting to see visually. It's upsetting that this was used for capitalist propaganda purposes, for fascist propaganda. That's the part that's upsetting, because these are real photos of real people. They're just used for the absolute worst purposes. that you can imagine. In addition to the frog child photo, Amunde includes 6 other photos published almost a year earlier in the United States by Thomas Walker. These include the photos of soldiers with dead horses, also featured in the 1934 Daily Press under the caption, Belgorod's Trail of Death. Belgorod is in Russia, not Ukraine. Parentheses. Though fully aware of the Daily Express's credit to a young English quote-unquote tourist, Amende credits this picture to the German Dr. Ditloff. Among the remainder of Amende's undocumented but politically captioned menagerie are distressed pictures of starving children, strikingly reminiscent of the period embracing the last years of Tsarism, World War I, and the immediate post-war period. In fact, brothers in distress, 2 emaciated children, one spoon feeding the other from a pot, has nothing to do with the alleged 1930s events in Ukraine. Millions of North Americans who viewed Peter Ustinov's Russia TV series saw the same photo portraying hunger conditions in an earlier period. The picture originated as a still copied from a documentary film made long before the 1932 to 1933 famine. One notes that Amende makes no reference to either of his 2 photographers having filmed motion pictures. This picture has also been featured in other documentary movies of early 20th century Russia. Even the Ukrainian nationalist propaganda film Harvest of Despair presents this picture in relation to the 1922 Russian famine. Human life in Russia's sordid tale of fraud does not end here. The top photograph, opposite page 161, was first published in Nazi Germany's party organ Volkischer Beobachter in Germany, August 18, 1933. It is one of 3 obviously updated 1920s photos used with the article Hungerhole Sauergestrusland. I don't know, dude. Again, it's been so long since I've actually studied German. The article is unsigned, indicating that it represents official Nazi party line. Amende has captioned his version of the photo, Famine Victims in Hospital. This holds damaging implications for famine genocide theorists. Medical care and rehabilitation contradicts the notion of a deliberate famine to exterminate a people. Yeah, why are you providing healthcare to everyone if you want to genocide them? Right? It doesn't add up. There are still more contradictions. Amede states that all of human life in Russia's photographs were taken in the summer of 1933. One is therefore astonished to find a summer graveyard scene appearing on the same page as a photo of a pile of naked, frozen corpses.
Some people with migraine can't speak clearly. Why does that happen?
On a snow-covered field.
One is when someone is having a migraine attack, there's some slowing of cognition. People don't feel like they're thinking right.
Do you see the aphasia? The aphasia is coming back for me.
Other individuals may actually have speech symptoms, and they may have a symptom called aphasia, where they have a difficulty understanding language or difficulty expressing words.
The latter seems to be a portrayal from a different camera angle of a winter graveyard scene found in the 1922 book La Famine en Russie.
Some individuals may actually have what we call dysarthria, which is garbled speech, where their speech is slurred.
This photo has not yet been laid to rest in history's refuse pile. Used as a Famine genocide evidence, the photo's caption is frequently rewritten, showing the subsequent author's discomfort with Amende's quote-unquote his claim. For example, the photo appears in the Black Deeds of the Kremlin with the caption, "Frozen corpses at a Kharkov cemetery." Sorry, Kharkiv. It's Kharkiv now. Cemetery. I'm sorry, the Black Deeds of the Kremlin? The Black Deeds of the Kremlin. What? In Nahayevsky's ultra-rightist History of Ukraine, the caption is changed without any mention of location. Shown above is a snow-covered pile of famine corpses. They had to lie there until the spring awaited burial. That's just how it works, frankly. This is not unique to genocide or USSR, I guess, communism. Like it's just not unique at all. Like, you can't dig into frozen ground. Like, good luck. Like, if you're digging with like a shovel, you don't have any fucking any tractors, excavation guys, what are you gonna do? What tell me what you would do. Shown above is a snow-covered pile of famine corpses. They had to lie there until spring, awaiting burial. Justniks 50 years ago, the famine holocaust in Ukraine, gives no hint as to the location or season, but has cropped out parts of the snow-covered foreground. His caption reads, "This is not a pile of wood, but corpses of starved Ukrainians at a burial spot." Other than the above captions, these authors give no information as to the source of the photos whatsoever. Other examples of interpolative or arbitrary captioning can be cited concerning this one picture alone. Other quote-unquote summer scenes in human life in Russia include a subject dressed in a heavy coat, head covering, and boots. A corpse wagon driver whose bulky fur hat and fastened up fur-collared coat also indicate costume indicative of an earlier decade. A woman and a boy bundled up for winter, the boy wearing not only a hat but a hooded coat, scarf, and mittens as well. Yet another shows photos of a girl with a coat, hat, and scarf, holding a naked child on her lap. While Amende's reluctance to document his pictures is understandable, it is curious that most famine genocide authors utilizing the same photographs neither cite nor mention Amende, his book, nor its mysterious photographers. This is surprising since Human Life in Russia is frequently cited for its text and is recognized by right-wing historians as a classic book for their purposes. Curious you don't want to cite any of the photos, but you want to cite the bullshit text that accompanies them. Curious. Subsequent publications use the same photos in one of the two manners. Either they are used without any pretense of documentation, with no credit to any photographer, or credit is given to Thomas Walker and or the Hearst Press. This despite the fact that Walker claimed to have taken the photos in the early spring of 1934. While photos are currently used to portray events in 1932 or 1933. What is time anyway? You can just use any photo from any span of 3 years and it's basically the same thing. Same thing. Location, also not important. Stop asking questions. For example, Alexa Vorapay's The Ninth Circle credits Thomas Walker for those of its pictures shared with Human Life in Russia, and credited to Ditloff by Amende. The Great Famine in Ukraine, the Unknown Holocaust, leaves undocumented photos designated by Amende to have been taken by the unnamed Austrian. and credits Thomas Walker for photos, which Amende has credited to Ditloff. In a partial departure from this practice, Harvard's Famine in the Soviet Ukraine, 1932 to 1933, a memorial exhibition, attributes some of the photos in question to Thomas Walker, and the rest yet to another book which credits Ditloff. They can't even get their own shit straight at Harvard. While the average person might understandably despair at this confusing tangle of documenting evidence, one justifiably expects historians to verify and authenticate source material. Thus, it is rather astonishing that Harvard University's Dr. James E. Mace played a significant role in all of the above books. Not only did he pen the historical introduction to the 1984 reprint of Human Life in Russia, he edited and introduced the Ninth Circle, contributed a feature article to The Great Famine in Ukraine, and was one of the 3 people credited with preparing famine in the Soviet Ukraine. He's thereby affixed his seal of approval to contradictory and mutually exclusive accounts concerning the origin of the photos. Apparently prepared to endorse anything anti-communist, certain academics seem intent on compromising their reputation and that of their university. Shade. I love academic shade. What then is one to make of the photographic evidence offered by Amende's Human Life in Russia? Were Ditloff's photos actually Walker's? Or were perhaps Walker's photos actually Ditloff's? Amende does state that some of the photos had previously been published without Ditloff's permission. As though anticipating doubts and challenges, Amende feebly passes the buck, saying that Ditloff would assume full responsibility and guarantee the photo's authenticity. Predictably, Amende makes no attempt to clarify just where, when, and by whom some of the Ditloff photos had previously been published. Nor does he state which photos had been used without his permission. Since the previous unauthorized publication of an author's most important source of evidence, particularly if accompanied by accounts contrary to one's own, is an affront to any honest historical writer. Amende's silence on the matter engenders the utmost skepticism. Topping it off is the fact that Amende was well aware of Hearst's Famine series from its beginning. He only cites Hearst's account to develop his own argumentation, but also states, on January 5th, 1935, Rudolf Randolph Hearst broadcast a speech based on almost entirely on the account of the Cardinal Innitzer Committee. The entire Hearst press next proceeded to deal with the Russian famine. One recalls that Thomas Walker's faked articles and photos were the very first of Hearst's Famine series. Thus, Amende was no innocent dupe who received bogus photos in ignorance. In fact, Amende was the general secretary of the Innitzer Committee, from whose accounts Hearst drew information for his January broadcast. Other aspects of Amende's past raise questions. According to his preface to Human Life in Russia, Amende spent time in the Volga and Kama regions of Tsarist Russia, studying peasants and the Russian grain trade as early as 1913. After the revolution, during the period of foreign intervention and civil war, Amende admits to having held a post with the counter-revolutionary Estonian and Latvian governments. He was assigned to work in liaison with Hetman Skoropadsky regime, installed in Ukraine by the Germans in 1918. Amende's political sympathies can be detected in legitimizing reference to the independent Ukrainian republic under the Kaiser's puppet, Skoropadsky. Amende describes his work as a journalist and involvement in support in relief work in the Russian famine of 1921 to 22. And following the subsequent career of this off-cited expert on the Ukrainian famine, one notes that for many years, Amende served as the General Secretary of the so-called European Nationalities Congress, which included nationalist emigre affiliates and others who had fled the Russian Revolution. Curious. The Nazi Party organ Völkischer Beobachter laudingly acclaimed Amende in promoting the famine genocide campaign and the European Nationalities Congress in 1933. Late in 1933, Amende was appointed honorary secretary of the Interconfessional and International Relief Committee for the Russian famine areas of the pro-fascist Cardinal Initzer of Vienna. Even Harvard's Dr. Mace had to admit that it had to be said that Amende called for aid to Hungary only after the famine had come to an end. Against every genocide except the current one, right? Amende's associations, travels, and activities indicate that he was in an excellent position to have had access to a wide variety of human suffering and famine pictures during the 2 decades prior to the 1930s. Indeed, a wide assortment of photos and documentary film footage was taken in Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and Armenia during the period of World War I and the World War I, the Russian Revolution, Civil War, and foreign intervention, events which contributed to the Russian famine of 1921 to 22. These photos taken by journalists, relief agencies, medical workers, soldiers, and individuals were frequently published in the newspapers and brochures of the period. Such photos were most likely sourced for famine genocide photographic quote-unquote evidence. They could easily be culled from archives, collections, newspaper morgues, and grafted onto accounts of the 1930s. In fact, certain key Ditloff, quote-unquote, Ditloff pictures published in Human Life in Russia did originate from 1922 famine publications. For example, the photo captioned "The Last Journey," 183, was first published well over a decade earlier. Captioned "Funeral Procession in Kherson," it appears in the Bulletin, information number 22, published in Geneva, Switzerland, by Dr. Fridtjof Nansen's International Committee for Russian Relief, issued on April 30, 1922. Similarly, Amende's photograph, opposite 65, can also be found in the 1922 Bulletin, page 16. The photograph of emaciated children neatly posed on a bench opposite strongly resembles the technique and style of arranged official documentation photos taken by relief groups during the 1921 to 22 famine. This is just the actual publications. As an experienced 1921 to 22 Russian famine relief worker, Amende was undoubtedly familiar with the 1922 Nansen material. Indeed, Amende describes a meeting with Nansen in Human Life in Russia. There's little doubt that Amende was complicit in his friend Ditloff's famine photo-taking adventure. It may be, however, that a more central role is the fraud was played by Ditloff himself and the Nazis. Dr. Ditloff, it will be recalled, was the director of the German government's agricultural concession in the North Caucasus, under agreement between the German government and the Soviets. When Hitler took power in early 1933, Ditloff, like famine experts Herlroth and Henke, did not resign in protest. He remained as director of the project's duration. He remained as director for the project's duration, indicating that the Nazis did not consider him inimical to their interests. I don't know this word, actually. Inimical. Inimical. Google help. Help. What are words?
Inimical.
Inimical. Okay, I said it right. It doesn't make sense. Why is that? I don't like this word. L word. Word tier list 1. I actually would make a tier list of words. That would be fun. Harmful, antagonistic, adverse, often by reason of hostility or malevolence. He remained as director for the project's duration, indicating that the Nazis did not consider him inimical to their interests. Following his return to Nazi Germany later that year, Ditloff gathered or fronted for a spurious assortment of famine photographs. These, as has been shown, included photos stolen from the 1921 to 1922 famine sources. In addition, at least 25 of the Ditloff photos can be shown to have been released by the Nazis, many of which were passed to or picked up by various anti-Soviet and pro-fascist publishers abroad. They always use the same set of photos which you cannot identify the place of, which is something they touched on in chapter 1 or 2, saying they'll remove all of the landmarks, any identifiable building or person, they'll even remove faces, they just remove all context and expect you to believe it. And I guess it works. Some of Ditloff's photos were published in the Nazi Party organ Volkischer Beobachter, August 18, 1932. Others turned up in the London Daily Express, August 6, 1934. Here one should note that Amende and Ditloff were in England in May 1934, campaigning for British pressure against the Soviet Union on the famine question. The famine question. Amende and Ditloff visited the British Foreign Office, seeking to make the British vote on Soviet admission to the League of Nations, conditional on some Soviet assurances on the matters such as famine relief. Yeah, they just care about famine so much in the League of Nations. Classically, they cared a lot about famine and starvation, which is why they were causing famines and starvation all over. They hate that. They hate famine. As Thomas Walker was then living in England as an anti-Soviet hack writer, it is possible that photos were passed to him there. Indeed, it becomes obvious that Walker was the anonymous English tourist in the London Daily Express. In 1935, both the Nazi press and William Randolph Hearst systematically promoted the famine genocide campaign, complete with gruesome photographs. That year also saw the publication in Berlin of Nazi Alfred Lampenheimer's violent anti-Semitic book, Und du seist die Sowjetreich. Lampenheimer's introduction to NEC of the Soviets correctly, glowingly praises Hitler's rule. Thank God that since the National Socialist Nazi Revolution, these incomprehensible conditions have been fundamentally changed. The struggle against the Bolshevik terror has successfully been carried out in Germany. Man, get fucked. You don't even know. You don't even know it's coming. Comes as no surprise that in 1937, the Nazis authorized a second printing of this book. Prominently featured in Lampenheimer's book is a special section of 25 Ditloff photographs used to illustrate the Nazis' famine genocide claims. 2/3 of these are identical to Thomas Walker's photos published the same year by the Hearst Press. In fact, the Ditloff photos in Und du seist, I don't know, include virtually the whole set of Walker photographs. Ditloff contributed more than photographs to this Nazi propaganda book. And you see, also includes a major article by the Doctor. From Doctor Who, the Doctor, who is acclaimed as an authority in the article's introduction. I'm sorry, they just capitalized Doctor, so I'm like, I can only assume this is the literal Doctor. What did he do? What has he done? In 1936, Dr. Ditloff's old traveling companion and fellow Famine campaigner, Ewald Amende, published his English language edition, Human Life in Russia. Contrary to Amende's claim, the majority of the photos are Ditloff's fakes. A significant number being identical to those used by both Walker and Laubenheimer the previous year. Whatever the actual mechanics of the distribution of the Ditloff-Walker photographs, their fraudulence is well established. Those intent on propagating the famine genocide myth for political purposes have not hesitated to use these photographs repeatedly to this day, without adding a shred of authenticating evidence to this questionable material. The political motives and persuasions of the groups and individuals involved are indeed relevant here. German Nazis defeated right-wing Ukrainian nationalist exiles, European conservatives, neo-fascist media millionaires like Hearst, all wanted to isolate and bring pressure on the Soviet Union to discredit and reverse socialist developments. We did it. Oh, that's the end of the chapter. Banger end of the paragraph. And ender paragraph here. Really summed it up. Anyone repeating this claim to this day is one of these things. Are you a neoliberal in the press? Are you a millionaire? Are you a Ukrainian nationalist? Are you a Nazi? Are you just a conservative? You know? BBC, that's not nice. Wait, what's not nice? I mean, BBC does this too, yes. They do that. They do. You didn't need to say Nazi so many times. Are you a Nazi or a Nazi? Or are you a Nazi? Any thoughts, any questions?